I want to look with you today at Psalm 77, which includes this astonishing question that's highly relevant to every generation, including our own, and that people often ask and Christians are often afraid to ask. Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? That's the question of a very honest believer, the painful question of an honest believer when things seem to be going wrong, when God's people are under pressure or in trouble, or simply when the world is a mess. Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? Or other bits of the psalm, has his steadfast love ceased forever? His praises are always from true. Here's a psalmist going through it, not hearing answers to his prayers, wondering what's going on, wondering whether God's asleep or given up. Just given up on his people. A desperately honest psalm. Of course, it doesn't end there. We've got some good news to come a bit later on. But I want to take you into something slightly technical about this psalm and a number of the others that's just worth noticing, for interest at least. In most versions of the Bible, this psalm will have just a few words of, perhaps in italics, at the beginning. To the leader, according to Jeduthun of Asaph, a psalm. And many of the psalms have a little intro like that in the original text. Some Bible versions don't print them. Most psalters, where you have the psalms set to be sung, don't print them. It's a shame because it's just a little bit of historical background. Some people think they're an addition, they're not part of the psalm or the poem or the song. Well, that's correct. They're not part of the poem. They're a little bit of text introducing it. But the very, very earliest editions of the Hebrew Bible we've got, the various earliest manuscript scrolls and so on, do include those words. In most of the Psalms have just a little intro like that. It isn't something that was added later by the translators, it was there all along. So I think it's useful to have it in the Bibles, perhaps in italics. I think it's a shame when they miss it out. It sometimes gives you a little bit of background. In this case, it identifies the author as Asaph. Asaph is mentioned in the Bible as one of the people David appointed to be in charge of the music for the people of his day. It could be that this is someone of the school of Asaph, following on in that tradition. It might even be Asaph himself, one of the gifted musicians of David's day, which would make the psalm about 1000 BC. Jeduthun is probably the name of a tune, and the leader is the leader of the choirs and the musicians, the director of music. To the leader, according to Jeduthun, of Asaph, a psalm. Asaph is attributed as having written Psalms 50 and 73 to 83, and they have a distinctiveness about them. And that this is the first of these we've looked at in this series on the Psalms. But Asaph has this big problem, and the first 10 verses of the psalm are full of that problem, that God doesn't seem to be listening. I commune with my heart in the night, I meditate and search my spirit. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favourable? That's Asaph's worry in verses 1 to 10. And verse 11, there are 20 verses in this psalm. He changes tack halfway through. Verse 11, I will call to mind the deeds of the Lord. I will remember your wonders of old. I'll meditate on all your work and muse on your mighty deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is so great as our God? You are the God who works wonders. You have displayed your might among the peoples, and so on. Asaph's answer to his problem, and his answer for other people to join in as the psalm is used in worship, the second half of the song, Asaph's answer is, if we think God isn't answering our prayers, if we feel he doesn't seem to be around or awake today, if we've lost sight of his mercy and his goodness and his power and his might, then let's just remember the history. Let's go back and recall the stories of God of old and what he did and how he blessed. For Christians today, as for the Jewish people of Asaph's day, knowing something of the history is important. Asaph's history is, of course, all in our Bible, in our Old Testament, in the first half of the Old Testament, the bit before Asaph. We've got a longer history. We've got the whole of the Bible, which includes the history of Jesus, what he did and his miracles, his acts, his crucifixion, his resurrection, his sending the Spirit. We've got the story of the Acts and the blessings through the early church and the persecutions. And then we've got the whole of church history to read and enjoy. You don't have to read church history. You don't have to love church history as I do in order to be a faithful Christian. It's an added bonus for me. But knowing something of how God has blessed of old is the biblical answer to, is God still around? Is he still blessing? Asaph recalls the times when God's people were going through it, really going through it, and how God blessed them. And he finishes the psalm with, you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. And he's remembering there, of course, leading them out of persecution and slavery in Egypt, leading them through the 40 years in the wilderness, God being faithful, feeding them in the desert, looking after them, protecting them from unknown as well as known dangers. Asaph looks back and sees that God does bless his people. And that's the answer to his problem. Is God hearing my prayer at the moment? Well, I just can't sense it. But I look back at the history and I know that God does bless his people and he's there for them. And he's there for us too. Amen.